Broadcasting live from Houston, from the space city to the world. You are watching Now Media Television.
Welcome to Power CEOs, the truth behind the business. I'm Jen Gaudet, your fearless host. I am an entrepreneur, an investor, and a business strategist. And I am here today because I believe that iron sharpens iron. And when we share what's working in business, and maybe even what isn't, what we're able to do is link arms and elevate and grow together. So what does that mean? That means that as we grow personally, professionally in our businesses, and our businesses grow, the ripple effect impacts not only ourselves and our family, but our teams, their family, our clients, our communities, and our world. I'm really excited to be here today because I have a very special guest for you in studio. Stephanie Puryear Helling is here, and she spent 25 years in the multifamily real estate world, kind of in a corporate gig, and she has transitioned into entrepreneurship, so she can really bring a whole lot of value from the leadership and that executive function, as well as that transition here today. Stephanie, I'm really excited to have you here today. Welcome to the studio.
Jen, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here with you. I love your show, so thank you for having me here to talk with you today.
Absolutely, and we're going to just dive right in because so many times people reach out who watch the show and they may be in a corporate job and side gigging or wanting to go into business for themselves, but they really are held back. They have a fear, they don't know when to take the leap, or they take the leap before they have a plan. And you were forced into a situation where you had to make the leap. So I'd really love to dig into your story and how you transitioned out of corporate and into entrepreneurship.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So as you mentioned, I was in multifamily real estate for 25 plus years, and the last company that I worked for 3 companies during that time, I was with for 21 years. Absolutely loved them, thought I could see myself retiring there. I wore many different hats in learning and development and real estate strategic services, and we'd acquired a lot of other companies, which made us the largest global leader in that space. And of course, COVID happened, right? Which was challenging for all of us and so many companies. And during that transition, we were also going through some restructuring as a result of company acquisition. And I was laid off, which was actually a blessing because I'd been thinking about, what do I do next in my career? And several people that I know, some of my mentors had been talking to me about going out on my own for a few years because I'd been speaking on the national circuit for 20. And so it really was the push that I needed. Now, I certainly wouldn't have necessarily chosen to make that leap during a global pandemic, but it did allow me to stretch myself, right? And take that leap and figure out what am I going to do next and how am I going to do it. So I started my company. And
I think that's really interesting, and I want to just kind of highlight that so many people believe that they have job security, and we're facing those similar situations. There's a lot of layoffs happening because of economic reasons. There's a lot of restructuring going on. So a lot of people are stuck in a corporate job thinking, I have job security, but you found that wasn't actually, it was a myth. So I just wanted to highlight that and ask you, when that happened, it was out of the blue. You didn't expect it. We were talking about this before the show.
Yeah.
And so it kind of hit you out of left field. So talk to us about the resilience and during that transition, because you said it's a blessing and we can think about that now, but there's a lot of people facing that exact same scenario today.
Yeah, so it was unexpected because I knew we were going to do restructuring. I had several conversations with the person that I was reporting to about taking on a very different role that really wasn't the best fit for me. I mean, you and I talked on the phone. I'm a DI, ENFJ. My focus has always been on leading and developing teams and people. And we had a conversation about me taking on a role that was not people-oriented or people-driven. So looking in hindsight, looking back, I had a hand in that, right? Because I didn't want to do what this restructuring was suggesting. But at the end of the day, I was a little bit surprised because I did think, well, surely there will be a different role that's a better fit for me, and that wasn't the case. And I wasn't the only, person that was laid off. We'd gone through 2 rounds of layoffs. And when that happens, it can be devastating because, as you mentioned, people do think they have job security. I loved the people I worked with and for and that company so much. And so it was, difficult to navigate. However, I will share with you that, on that phone call that I received, within about 5 minutes, I told the person I was reporting to, I said, give me 30 seconds, and I paused. And then I got back on the phone and I said, okay, so let's talk about the transition plan because I wanted to make sure projects and my team and people were taken care of. And she said, I'm amazed at your reaction. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, you're just pivoting. And I said, well, that I'm solution oriented, right? And so once a decision like a layoff is made, that ship has sailed. And back in 08, 09, when the banks were going under and many businesses were impacted, particularly multifamily real estate, I had to lay off 3 amazing people on my team, and that was not a decision that we chose lightly. It was not a decision that I really wanted to have to make. And so I'd been there. And I knew in her spot how difficult of a position that is when you have to make a tough choice. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I feel for you and the fact that you're having to have this conversation. So I think the resilience aspect is something that I'm really passionate about helping people with. I've had many life changes in my life over the last few years. One of those alone, like a layoff, right, can set someone back, and you question, your worth and your value and all of those things. And those are natural human emotions to have. But at the end of the day, when something like that happens, we really have 2 choices, right? We can be bitter, or we can use that as an opportunity to move forward and be better. And it doesn't mean stuff down all of the emotions that come up. We are human. You have to feel them. You have to go through that. But then once you've felt it and you've processed it, now you need to take action. And what is that going to be?
I love how you bring that up because we were speaking a lot about reinventing ourselves. Both of us have reinvented ourselves throughout the course of our proverbial career, whether entrepreneurship, corporate, what have you. And it requires a level of resilience. And entrepreneurship requires a high level of resilience because let's just take business. Any given day in business, there's going to be challenges. We don't succeed all the time. And I think this is something that's really important to talk about because, the Instagram life or what we see on social media is everybody's wins, and nobody really talks about all the failures that we have, all the challenges and the times that we have to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off and go, great, that didn't work. What am I going to do differently so I don't repeat this mistake? And that mental resiliency is such a key part of entrepreneurship. And so talk to me a little bit about if people are in these challenging situations, maybe they thought they had job security and they've been let go. Maybe they are in corporate thinking about making their side gig full-time, or maybe they're in business and they really have a hard time when they get knocked down. What are some ways that people can start to build that mental resilience, that resiliency muscle, so that when the tough stuff happens, they are able to dust themselves off and say, well, great, I'm going to use this, I'm going to learn from this, and I'm going to keep moving forward?
Great question. So I think first and foremost, people can have the tendency when something like that happens to beat themselves up, right? What did I do wrong? Where did I fail? How could I have prevented this from happening? And those are good questions to ask because sometimes perhaps there is something we said or did or didn't do that could have contributed to the outcome of a circumstance, right? And so it's good to ask those questions in a sort of debrief capacity. However, it's really important to look at yourself and know and value your strengths. right? So I'm a huge assessment geek, and you and I shared our results with one another. But I think if you haven't done assessments, or even if you have and it's been a while, it's a great opportunity to maybe look at your results from before or do it again, because now you've experienced a major life change. And that can really help you take an objective approach and look at who you are, what your natural talents, strengths, and abilities are, and where you may be able to leverage or apply those in a different way than you did before. We've heard about the Great Recession, right? And quiet quitting. And there are so many people out there, which I think the pandemic exacerbated that, right? But there are so many people out there that may not be happy or fulfilled in a job. And maybe they chose a job or career because their parents told them that was what they were supposed to do. Or in school, it was just the natural transition. And I'm all for higher education and school and doing that. However, sometimes people have chosen something that maybe isn't the best match for themselves. And then they wonder, why am I unhappy? Why am I not fulfilled? There's got to be something more. So first and foremost, it's knowing yourself, appreciating yourself, and giving yourself some grace as well, right?
Absolutely. And Stephanie, you said something, and I really kind of want to highlight it because it's really important. A lot of times we define our success or our career path based off of someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And you were in a corporate role for 25 years, and we were talking, and you shared that you were thinking about like what's next even within that role.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times we follow just because we think this is what we're supposed to do, but truly success it's individual. It is an individual situation, and we cannot look at another human being and say, oh, well, because Stephanie's version of success means this, then Jen's has to mean this too. It's absolutely individualized. And I think so many times what has happened is we've set a goal based off of other people's ideas of success, or you're supposed to climb the ladder, and then we get there. And we get to that executive role and we're like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. This isn't exactly what I want. So when people are finding themselves in that, how do they kind of reinvent themselves, or how do they step back with this awareness? Because you've talked about the first thing is knowing yourself, knowing who you are. But how do they take that meta step back and say, okay, what does success even mean for me? Like, what are a couple of actionable items that people who are watching maybe can take to reassess, like, am I going in the direction I meant to? I've been going in this direction, but it's kind of veering left, and I'm realizing that I want to course correct because it's not where I exactly want to be, whether in business or in a corporate role.
Sure, great question. So as I mentioned, knowing yourself first, but then I think another really important question to ask is, how can I best leverage my talents, my knowledge, my skills and abilities to help others? Right? Where can I give the most of what I have to give, my gifts, and we all have them. We all have our natural gifts. Are you using those today? And if the answer is maybe 20% of the time, that's a really good indicator to look for opportunities where you can leverage and align your knowledge, skills, abilities, and talents. And as I mentioned, I had some really candid conversations prior to that layoff over a 6-month period. And I was vulnerable and I was honest with both myself, with the person that I was reporting to, and with the organization on what I felt was not only best for me, but also what was best for the organization. And I think sometimes people are afraid to have those candid, real, raw conversations because they don't want to make waves, right? Or they're afraid, oh, well, if I say that, then this may go away. And that is true, right? But if you don't take that risk and you're not true to yourself, is it really worth it to stay somewhere where you're not ultimately fulfilled and happy? And I hope the answer that most people would have is no, right? Because you were meant to do something. You were meant to give your gifts to the world. And so having that realization is really important. And being brave is a big part of resiliency. you mentioned in business and entrepreneurship and really life, right? Life is not an easy road. There are bumps in the road, there are hurdles, there are mountains to climb, and we will slide down that mountain and we will fall into the pit sometimes. And I think another thing that's really important, and a lot of what I'm talking about is all related to mindset, is having that mindset that you will fall and you will fail, and that's part of success. And you have to be willing to do that, because if you are not willing to risk, then you're not going to reach your full potential or the milestones that you want to reach.
Absolutely, and I want to dig into this again a little bit more, because you now have switched and transitioned out, and what you do as your core business is leadership training, and one of the real hot topics right now in business is change management and leadership, and empowering our people to be in the right role and on a career path that's right for them. That is a big hot topic right now in a lot of companies. And so now that you've been through this and you've seen this firsthand multiple times in business and life, as many of us have, what could entrepreneurs and executives do to facilitate that psychological safe space where their employees feel safe going to their managers, their leaders, their executives and saying, hey, look, I thought this was really what I wanted and I'm feeling unfulfilled here. Is there a way for me to address this in a way that is a win-win both for me and the company? So how are you now, what would you tell an entrepreneur and executive who's dealing with this? Because this is a big thing. We talked about quiet quitting, and it is a very big shift in business. So how can we start to think about that or create that psychological safe space where employees can come to us without fear of retribution, which, of course legally, but there's always something there.
Yeah. Well, it is a culture shift, right? So creating a culture of resiliency is huge. And what I mean by that is, as you mentioned, you do have to create that safe space, and it starts at the top and it trickles down. What kind of leader do you want to be? And do you know what your team members think about your leadership style? Have you done team member surveys? Which, the one thing I'll say about team member surveys, though, they're fantastic because you get a lot of feedback. But if you're going to do a team member survey, you have to be willing to take action with that feedback, and at the very least communicate your reaction to feedback. We can't necessarily change 100% of the things that our team members come to us with in terms of ideas or suggestions, but we can use that as a jumping off point to really get a strong pulse on the culture and the morale of the organization. And I talk a lot about leadership statistics, and you've probably heard this, most of us have probably heard this, but people typically don't leave companies, they leave bosses, yes, right? They do. And so that immediate supervisor is the most important influential person in whether or not a team member succeeds or fails, or has loyalty to the company, or is engaged with the organization. So communication is key. Being open-minded, also the leaders being vulnerable, particularly with everything that we've gone through within the world in the last couple of years, but how companies have been impacted. It's really important that leaders feel comfortable with opening up and being vulnerable. So when things are not going well, having a State of the Union address with the organization, and then in small groups to say, we know these 3 things that have happened within our organization have been really tough on everyone, and we want to talk to you about that. How are you feeling? What are your biggest pain points? And give them a little bit of hope, because at the end of the day, team members need 4 things from their leaders, and they need trust, compassion, hope, and they need a vision. And so that should be at the forefront of what we're doing to communicate to our teams within the organization. And then secondly, I'll add to that, in addition to doing something about the feedback, providing a support system and structure. And that can come in a number of different ways. So you can have structured programs, which I think have great value, right? But you can also have informal programs with a little bit of structure, things like mentorship programs and peer coach programs, so that people know where they can go and what their resources are. I help people with onboarding, team members as well, creating onboarding programs. And the two most important things that teams need to know, or that people need to know during onboarding, but really at any time, is who to know and where to go, right? So who are those crucial people that I need to be connected with in the organization, and where do I need to go to get what I need? And often, it sounds simple, but I will tell you, oftentimes when I'm helping organizations navigate change management or working with them on leadership development, you can point back to, they don't know their resources. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to go to. They don't know how to do things. And there are broken down lines of communication. So communication, who to know, where to go, simple in theory, right? But sometimes difficult to execute, which is why I help people with that.
Absolutely, and execution and implementation of these things is what's really key. And so just to kind of summarize and add on to some of the things that you said, you know, when we are communicating or when we're getting feedback and soliciting feedback, it's important for us to have that safe space that they can give that honest feedback, but we have to respond to that, because if we don't, let's just be real, all human beings have a need to be heard. Like, that is part of the communication process. And so many times, and what I've found as well, Stephanie, and you echoed this, is leaders ask for feedback, but then they don't actually do anything about it. So then what happens the next time you ask for feedback is everybody's like, well, I gave you my feedback and nothing changed. Yeah. And so we have to break that cycle as leaders, and it's been a real shift, because now what we have to do as leaders of our companies, as executives, we have to be transparent with a lot more transparent than what we were accustomed to even 10 years ago, right? It used to be that the C-suite would get together and it would be all hush-hush and they'd make decisions, and then all of a sudden things would roll out. Now we have to have those open, transparent conversations. This is the direction that we're heading. This is why we're heading there. And let's be real, the younger generations want to get behind companies that are making an impact beyond just the product or service that we're providing. They want to know they're making an impact in the world. And so if we're, as leaders, not really fully communicating that in a way that they buy into the vision, we've already lost the younger generations at this point in time. So I think it's really, really awesome, the points that you brought up, and I think it's also very key that we are transparent with where we're going. If we have a change in the direction of our company, we have to be transparent. This is the vision. This is why the change is happening. It's this vision. This is what we're going to do and how we're going to have an impact, and messaging that in such a way that they can get excited and be a part of that change. So I really love that you brought that to the forefront. If you are listening to this or watching this, be taking notes. Stephanie is dropping pure gold here. And really and truly, that was a whole lot of different things that we could take action on, Stephanie. What is the first thing, if people are about to institute some sort of a change? And let's just take the AI example. AI is hitting the entrepreneurial world and business by storm. We're all integrating it in some way. And so what is the one takeaway, if they're going to message this to their team, that they can be doing that, like the one action they can take today?
Yeah, well, the very first thing to do, the first step is to define the change, right? So the who, what, why, when, where, how. That has to be done, and identifying your key stakeholders, because you do need champions of change who are going to help you make that happen. But defining it is key. So oftentimes I see organizations say, oh my gosh, we need to do that. And you gave AI as an example, but it can't be a shoot, ready, aim approach, right? You really have to think about, okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how are we going to do this so that it works for us over the long term? So very much a strategic outlook before a change is implemented is key. Because oftentimes, and over 80% of organizations that try to implement change efforts fail. And they fail because they're not following a process. And there is a clearly defined process in any type of change management initiative. So defining it and identifying your key stakeholders, number one priority.
Fantastic. And we do have to take a brief break, but if you're listening to this at home, you know change is happening. It's happening every day. What is the strategy that you're going to implement, and who are the key stakeholders, the customers, the employees, the investors, whatever people that are involved in that change? Put that down on paper, just like Stephanie said, and we'll see you in just a few moments.